For 3 years, Gloria Jean Hargrove sat across from men at a beat-up diner on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, wearing her sister's old cardigan, driving a rusted 2009 Honda Civic, and telling every single one of them that she worked in office administration at a packaging plant. Every word of that was technically true. What she left out was that she owned the packaging plant, that Hargrove Packaging Solutions had 214 employees, 3 warehouses, and a contract with one of the largest retail chains in the Midwest. What she left out was the house in Bexley, the accountant named Frank who handled more money in a Tuesday than most people see in a year, and the fact that Forbes had mentioned her name, just once in a sidebar, 2 springs ago. She left all of that out on purpose. 6 men sat across from her over those 3 years. 6 men failed her test without even knowing they were being tested. And then came Wayne Calloway. Wayne showed up 7 minutes late to Miller's counter with drywall dust still on his left boot, a cracked phone screen he hadn't gotten around to fixing, and an apology so genuinely embarrassed it almost made Gloria Jean laugh out loud. He had no idea who she was. And what happened next, over 6 weeks across 3 dates and one terrible moment of truth, changed both of their lives in ways neither of them saw coming. If you've ever been afraid to trust someone again after life broke you once, stay with this story. It was made for you. And before we go any further, if stories like this reach something in you, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more coming, and you don't want to miss them. Gloria Jean Hargrove turned 58 the previous March. She celebrated it the same way she'd celebrated the last 4, quietly with her assistant Beverly a marble bundt cake from Schmidt's Bakery on Thurman Avenue, and exactly 0 fuss. Bev had tried to organize something bigger. Bev always tried. Gloria Jean always shut it down. It wasn't that she was unhappy. That's what people misunderstood about her. She wasn't bitter or closed off or difficult. She was careful. There is a difference, though not everyone can see it. She had built Hargrove Packaging Solutions from a $12,000 loan she took out at age 38, right after her divorce from Gary Pennington was finalized. Gary had been her high school sweetheart, her husband of 14 years, and, she understood only in hindsight, a man who had loved a version of her that required her to stay exactly the same forever. When Gloria Jean gained weight after her hysterectomy at 36, Gary didn't leave right away. He stayed another 2 years. But something shifted in him, quiet and cold, like a thermostat being turned down a single degree at a time. By the end, she could feel the distance from across the dinner table. She just didn't have the words for it yet. The divorce was civil enough. Lawyers, paperwork, a house sold, a life divided into boxes. The moment that sealed something inside her came 8 months later. She was at Lindy's on Beck Street, a rare night out with her friend Patrice, when she saw Gary walk in. He was with a woman, thin, pretty, laughing at something he said. And Gary was wearing the watch Gloria Jean had bought him for their 10th anniversary. She didn't cry, she didn't make a scene. She finished her glass of Riesling, paid her half of the check, and drove home in complete silence. That was the night she decided she would never again let a man choose her or leave her based on what he saw on the outside. If someone was going to love Gloria Jean Hargrove, they were going to love the whole complicated, overweight, loud-laughing, company-running, bundt-cake-eating truth of her. But how do you know if a man loves you for you, when you're worth more than he'll ever see? That question lived in her for 2 years before she found her answer. The test started not as a plan, but as an accident. Her first blind date after the divorce, set up by Patrice with the confidence only a happily married woman can have, was a man named Todd Larkin, financial advisor. Nice teeth. Drove a BMW he mentioned twice in the first 10 minutes. Bev had booked the restaurant, a nice one, white tablecloths. Todd walked in, saw Gloria Jean, and something in his face, just for half a second, flickered. Not disgust exactly, more like a man recalibrating his expectations. They sat down. He was perfectly polite, charming even. But as the evening wore on and Gloria Jean mentioned her company, mentioned the warehouses, mentioned the Forbes sidebar, Todd Larkin came alive, leaned forward, asked questions, started touching her hand across the table. She drove home that night and sat in her driveway for 20 minutes. She was not naive. She knew how the world worked, but she needed to know, really know, whether any man existed who would find her interesting, warm, and worth his time before the money entered the picture. So she came up with the Civic, the cardigan, Miller's counter, office administration at a packaging plant. Over 2 years, she tested 5 more men. 2 lost interest by the end of the first date once it was clear she wasn't wealthy. One asked her, gently but still asked, whether she had any savings, just practically speaking. One spent 40 minutes talking about a real estate opportunity he was developing and needed investors for. One, bless his heart, was actually very sweet, but spent the last 20 minutes of dinner checking the game score on his phone and never called again. 6 men, 6 failures, and Gloria Jean had almost decided, with the kind of quiet resignation that arrives when you've been proven right too many times, that the test itself was the problem. That maybe she should just accept that relationships at this age, with this life, were complicated and impure, and just something you managed rather than something you found. That was when Beverly called her on a Tuesday morning in September and said, "I met someone's uncle at church this weekend and I really think you should hear me out before you say no." Gloria Jean said no. Bev kept talking. Beverly Marsh had worked for Gloria Jean for 11 years. She knew every mood, every preference, every tell. She knew that when Gloria Jean tapped her pen twice on the desk, it meant she was listening even if she looked like she wasn't. She knew not to schedule anything before 9 in the morning. She knew the bundt cake thing. She knew about Gary, about the watch, about Lindy's. She also knew that Gloria Jean was lonelier than she admitted, not in a dramatic way, but in the way a house gets cold when the heat's been off a long time. Slowly, room by room, until you stop noticing it because you've just put on another sweater. "His name is Wayne Calloway," Bev said, leaning in the doorframe of Gloria Jean's office. "He's 52. He runs a small roofing company out of the South Side. Calloway and Sons, even though the son is only 8 years old and her name is Gracie." "That's a detail," Gloria Jean said, not looking up from her desk. "His wife Susan passed 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. He sold his truck and took out a second mortgage to cover her last round of treatment." Bev paused. "He never complained about it. Not once. His sister told me." Gloria Jean looked up. "He's not looking for anything serious," Bev continued. "He's just... His sister thought it might be good for him to get out. He agreed mostly to get her to stop asking. What does he look like?" "Like a man who works outside," Bev said. "Big hands, quiet eyes. He coaches Gracie's soccer team on Saturdays." Gloria Jean was quiet for a moment. "Miller's counter," she said finally. "Tuesday at 6. Tell him office administration." Bev allowed herself a very small smile and went back to her desk. Wayne Calloway walked into Miller's counter at 6:07 on a Tuesday evening in September, spotted Gloria Jean in the corner booth, and said, "I'm sorry, the school called right when I was leaving. Gracie forgot her retainer, and it turned into a whole thing." "I'm Wayne." He said it all in one breath, still slightly flustered, and Gloria Jean thought, this man is not performing anything. She told him she was Gloria, not Gloria Jean, just Gloria. She was wearing her sister Ruth Ann's old green cardigan and had driven the Civic and ordered a coffee before he got there. The booth had a little tear in the vinyl by the window. Wayne slid in across from her and picked up the laminated menu like a man who had eaten at places like this his whole life, which he had. They talked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Gloria Jean knew because she checked her watch when she got to the Civic afterward, and she had arrived at 5:45. Wayne talked about roofing the way some men talk about things they actually love. Not bragging, just explaining. He told her about a job last spring where they'd re-shingled an 80-year-old farmhouse in Pickerington and found original chestnut beams underneath the rot, and everyone on the crew just stood there for a minute looking at them. "You don't see that anymore," he said. "Wood like that. They don't make trees like that anymore, I guess." He asked her about her job. She gave her usual answer. Office administration, packaging plant. He nodded and asked one follow-up question, "Do you like it?" Not what does it pay, not what's the company, not what are your benefits. Just do you like it? She said it had its moments. He talked about Gracie, not excessively, not in the way that makes you feel like a man is using his child as a personality. Just naturally, the way Gracie seemed to occupy a natural portion of every conversation he had. Gracie had beaten him at checkers 3 nights in a row, and he was starting to think she was cheating but couldn't figure out how. Gracie wanted to be a veterinarian or possibly a paleontologist, and had not yet decided which was more important, animals or dinosaurs. "Those are both good choices," Gloria Jean said. "That's what I told her," Wayne said. When the check came, he reached for it at the same time she did. They had a brief, genuine argument about it, not the fake argument, the real one, and ended up splitting it down the middle. He did not make a big deal of it either way. He just pulled out his wallet, paid his half, and left $2 for the tip. It was the most natural date Gloria Jean had been on in 20 years. Walking to their cars, he asked if she might want to do this again sometime. No pressure in it, just a question. She said she thought she might. Driving home on I-670 in the dark in the old Civic, Gloria Jean Hargrove did something she hadn't done in a long time. She smiled to herself with nobody watching, for no reason except that she felt like it. The second date was also at Miller's counter. Wayne suggested it himself, which told Gloria Jean something. He wasn't trying to impress her with somewhere expensive. He just liked that. Halfway through dinner, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and said, "I'm sorry, do you mind if Gracie swings by? My sister was supposed to have her, but her youngest got an ear infection. She can sit right here, she's got her book." Gloria Jean said of course. Gracie Calloway arrived 12 minutes later with a paperback copy of Island of the Blue Dolphins tucked under her arm, and a chocolate milk from the counter that Wayne had ordered before she walked in. She was small for 8, with dark, serious eyes and her father's way of being still without being uncomfortable. She shook Gloria Jean's hand when Wayne introduced them. Actually shook it. "You have a firm handshake," Gloria Jean told her. "My dad taught me," Gracie said, and went back to her book. Gloria Jean looked at Wayne. Wayne looked like he was trying not to look pleased with himself and failing slightly. They stayed another hour. Gracie read. Wayne and Gloria Jean talked. At one point, Gracie looked up from her book to correct something Wayne had said about the migratory pattern of blue herons, because apparently they had done a report on it at Eastmore Elementary. Wayne accepted the correction without any fuss. Walking out, Gracie stopped at the gumball machine by the door and looked at it for a long moment. Wayne already had a quarter in his hand. Gloria Jean thought, "I am in serious trouble here." The third date was at Berliner Park on a Saturday. Wayne had mentioned Gracie had soccer practice there on mornings, and Gloria Jean had said, carefully, not pushing, that she sometimes walked there on weekends. It was not planned exactly, but it was not accidental either. They walked the path along the river and talked for an hour and a half. At one point, Wayne said, "I want to be honest with you about something," and Gloria Jean's chest tightened. He said, "I'm not a man with a lot to offer on paper right now. I've got a small business, a house that needs work, an 8-year-old who still sleeps with the light on. I'm not where I thought I'd be at 52. He paused. "But I'm steady. I show up, and I think you're worth showing up for." Gloria Jean almost told him everything right then. She didn't. She told herself she needed one more week. Just to be sure. That was her mistake. The following Thursday, one of Wayne's crew members, a young guy named Darnell who spent his lunch breaks scrolling his phone, was watching a clip of a local Columbus business segment from the previous spring. A 2-minute piece on Hargrove Packaging Solutions and their new regional contract. And there was Gloria Jean, in a blazer, standing in front of a warehouse with her name on it. Darnell showed it to the man next to him. That man mentioned it to Wayne that afternoon when they were cleaning up a job site off Livingston Avenue. Wayne watched the clip twice. He didn't say anything to anyone. He just finished rolling up the safety line, loaded his truck, and drove home. This is the part of the story where we have to stay with Wayne for a moment, because what he felt deserves to be understood, not just reported. Wayne Calloway was not a man who made speeches. He processed things quietly, the way people do when they've had to hold a lot together without anyone holding them. He had held Susan's hand through 6 rounds of chemo. He had made Gracie's lunches and coached her soccer and paid his bills and not complained, not because he was performing strength, but because that was genuinely how he moved through the world. He had one rule that came from his father, Earl Calloway, a man who never had much but always had his word. You don't deceive people you care about, even with good intentions, even if you think you're protecting them. Wayne had told Gloria Jean real things about his life, about Susan, about the mortgage, about being afraid some nights, that he wasn't enough for Gracie. Those were not small offerings. Those cost something to say, and she had sat across from him 4 times now and let him believe a version of her that wasn't true. He called her that evening. When she answered, his voice was flat and careful, which was worse than if he'd been angry. "I saw the news piece," he said, "the one about Hargrove Packaging." A silence opened up between them. "Wayne," she started. "I need a couple of days," he said. I'm not going to say something I don't mean." He hung up. He didn't call for 9 days. 9 days is a long time when you're waiting. Gloria Jean went to work. She signed contracts and took calls and sat in the meetings that filled her calendar like stones filling a jar. Bev brought her coffee without being asked and didn't push her to talk, which was its own kind of kindness. On the 5th day of silence, Gloria Jean told Bev what had happened. Bev listened. She had a way of listening that was completely still, no nodding, no small noises of agreement, just full and serious attention. When Gloria Jean finished, Bev was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I say something honest? When have you ever asked permission?" Bev said, "You didn't test that man, Gloria. You punished him for what Gary did." The words landed like something dropped from a height. "Gary wore your watch and left," Bev continued quietly. "So you decided every man that came after him had to prove himself innocent before you'd give him the dignity of knowing who you really are. And Wayne Calloway, who sold his truck to pay his wife's hospital bills and coaches his little girl's soccer team and told you he was steady, he had to prove it too, even after he already had." Gloria Jean stared at the far wall of her office for a long time. "I didn't mean to hurt him," she said. "I know," Bev said. "But you did." She found his address through his business listing. Calloway and Sons Roofing, south side of Columbus, Glenwood Avenue. She drove the Civic. It felt right to drive the Civic. She parked in front of a small white house with green shutters and a basketball hoop in the driveway, with a net that was starting to fray. There was a porch light on. It was 7:15 in the evening. She sat in the car for 14 minutes. She was not someone who sat in cars for 14 minutes. She ran a company. She made decisions by 9 in the morning that other people would have agonized over for a week. But she sat in that car for 14 minutes, and she was not ashamed of it. When she finally walked up the front path, the porch boards creaked under her feet. She knocked. She heard Gracie's voice inside. Not words, just the sound of it. And then Wayne's low response. And then footsteps. He opened the door. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. "I drove the Civic," she said. It was not what she planned to say first, but it was what came out. He looked past her at the car at the curb. Something moved across his face. He stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. They stood in the porch light for a while before either of them spoke. Gloria Jean told him everything. Not a rehearsed speech, just the truth in the order it happened. Gary, the watch, the company, the test, the 6 men before him, the Civic, the cardigan, Miller's counter. She told him about the Forbes sidebar and about how she'd almost told him at Berliner Park and hadn't, and how that was the worst decision she'd made in recent memory. She told him she wasn't asking him to understand it all at once. She just needed him to know that what she felt sitting across from him at that booth, with Gracie correcting him about the herons, was more real than anything she'd felt in a very long time. Wayne leaned against the porch railing and looked at the yard while she talked. He was quiet for a bit afterward. Then he said, "My dad used to say that fear is a bad reason to hurt somebody." He paused. "I think you were scared." "I understand scared." He turned to look at her. "But I need you to know that when I told you about Susan, when I told you about the mortgage and Gracie sleeping with the light on, I wasn't handing that to a stranger. I was handing it to you, because I thought you were being real with me." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I'm not going to tell you it was right. It wasn't." He nodded slowly. "Not a forgiveness, just an acknowledgement." The porch light buzzed softly. Somewhere down Glenwood a dog was barking at something and then stopped. Then Wayne said, "Gracie drew a picture of you at school last week. Her teacher wrote a note home because she wanted me to know Gracie had a new friend." Gloria Jean felt something tighten at the back of her throat. "She drew you with red hair," Wayne said. "You don't have red hair." "No," Gloria Jean said. "I don't. She said you looked like someone who would have red hair." And despite everything, despite the 9 days of silence and the confrontation and the weight of what she'd done, Gloria Jean laughed. A real one, the kind that comes up from somewhere low. Wayne almost smiled, not quite, but almost. "I'm not saying everything's fine," he said. "I need you to know that." "I know that," she said. "But I'm also not saying come back next week and we'll see." She waited. "Come back Saturday," he said. "Gracie's got soccer at 9. We usually get breakfast at Sunny Street after." He looked at her steadily. "If you want to come." Gloria Jean Hargrove, CEO, Forbes Sidebar, owner of 3 warehouses and 1 old Civic. nodded like a woman who had just been handed something fragile and knew it. "I'll be there," she said. She walked back down the path to the car. The porch boards creaked the same way they had coming up. She didn't look back, but she heard the front door open, and then Gracie's voice. "Dad, who was that?" And Wayne's answer, quiet and sure. "A friend," he said. "Go finish your dinner." Gloria Jean sat in the Civic for 30 seconds. Then she started the engine and drove home through the south side of Columbus, past the old storefronts and the lit-up gas stations in the neighborhoods that had been there longer than either of them. And she did not turn the radio on because the quiet felt like something worth keeping. Some people spend their whole lives building walls so strong they forget they also locked the door from the inside. Gloria Jean Hargrove had spent 6 years testing men for the courage to climb over. It turned out the right man didn't climb over anything. He just knocked. And she, finally, let him in. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because every week we bring you stories about real love, real courage, and real second chances. You've earned every one of them.